is a silent, sneaky, yet incredibly common pattern. When everything finally starts to go right in a person's life, something within them seems to sabotage the progress. A wrong decision, an unnecessary fight, a mistake that could have been avoided. Almost imperceptibly, the mind itself seems to find ways to make everything go away. And the most unsettling part, this usually happens at the moments when they are closest to achieving what they have always dreamed of. According to Gay Hendricks, author of the book The Big Leap, this tendency towards self-sabotage is no coincidence, nor is it weakness or bad luck. It is a deep psychological mechanism he called the upper limit problem. It's as if each person has an internal thermostat that determines how much success, love, and well-being they allow themselves to experience. When life begins to exceed this limit, when everything starts to go too well, this invisible system kicks in and pulls the person back to a more familiar and safe state, even if that state is one of pain, scarcity, or mediocrity. Hendricks asserts that this internal limit was built long before we became aware of it. Shaped by beliefs inherited in childhood, by messages we received from our parents, teachers, and society. Phrases like, "don't want too much," "don't show off," "don't be greedy," end up rooting themselves as silent truths that later transform into emotional blocks. And when reality begins to contradict these beliefs, the unconscious enters into conflict, generating guilt, fear, and sabotage. This sabotage can take many forms, from an unexpected failure after a major professional success to the abrupt end of a relationship that finally seemed healthy. It can be an emotional crisis that arises out of nowhere, a mysterious illness, or a series of bad decisions that don't seem to make sense rationally. But all these manifestations have something in common. They are unconscious attempts to keep us within our comfortable limit of happiness. The most alarming thing, according to Hendricks, is that this mechanism affects even the most successful people. The more you grow, the more urgent it becomes to identify and transcend this internal limit. Otherwise, you will continue to oscillate between temporary achievements and painful setbacks, always trapped in a cycle where success is allowed only up to a certain point, the point at which you still feel safe. This video is a deep dive into this psychological dynamic, an analysis based on the work of Gay Hendricks to understand why we sabotage ourselves just when we are about to win. And more importantly, how to identify this pattern in your life and how to start breaking it. Because as Hendricks warns us, it is not enough to just dream of success. You must learn to sustain it. And for that, you will have to challenge the deepest beliefs you hold about yourself. Gay Hendricks states clearly, each of us has an inner thermostat setting that determines how much love, success, and creativity we allow ourselves to enjoy. This statement, simple at first glance, carries a disturbing truth. Because this inner thermostat is not conscious. It is a deep psychological mechanism built from limiting beliefs and emotional experiences that have shaped how you interpret success, happiness, and even love. And the most frightening part, it is active all the time, silently controlling the limits of how much good you allow yourself to experience. This invisible problem is what Hendricks calls the upper limit problem. The central idea is that each individual carries within them a maximum point of well-being that they consider acceptable. When life begins to exceed this point, whether through a professional advancement, an explosion of love, or a period of intense joy, the subconscious interprets this excess of positivity as a threat. And then it springs into action, seeking to restore internal balance. However, this balance is not always healthy. It is often just familiar. Hendricks writes, when we hit our upper limit, we do something that stops our positive forward trajectory. In other words, it is not the outside world that sabotages our growth. It is ourselves, on a deep and automatic level. We create problems where none existed, start meaningless arguments, procrastinate, distract ourselves with trivialities, become ill, or simply lose enthusiasm. And the cruelest part, all of this can happen just when we are finally on the right path. This limit has been conditioned in us from an early age. If, in childhood, we were punished for standing out, praised for being modest, or ignored when we expressed our ambitions, we learned that shining too brightly is dangerous. If our happiness caused discomfort at home, we learned that being happy can lead to rejection. Hendricks reports, "Our upper limit thermostat setting holds us back from enjoying all the love, financial abundance, and creativity that's rightfully ours. In other words, you can achieve success, but you cannot enjoy it. You can experience great love, but feel guilty for being so happy. You can have money, but fear losing it. The problem is not outside, it is inside." And why is this problem so hard to perceive? Because it disguises itself. It takes on rational, logical forms. Failure seems just like bad luck. A sudden breakup seems like incompatibility. Procrastination seems like lack of motivation. But deep down, all of this may be the expression of the same mechanism. The unconscious attempt to keep everything within the limit it considers safe. And here is the most important point. This limit is completely arbitrary. It was learned, it is not real. And if it was learned, it can be reprogrammed. But for that, you first need to learn to recognize the ways in which self-sabotage manifests in your life. Because as long as this problem remains invisible, it will continue to control you. In the next chapter, we will explore exactly that. How self-sabotage disguises itself in daily life. How it sneaks into your routine, your relationships, your health, and even your victories. And what you can do to start seeing it. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Self-sabotage is a subtle art. It rarely presents itself as an obvious force that prevents you from moving forward. On the contrary, it is camouflaged, elegant, often rational. Most people do not realize they are self-sabotaging until it is too late. But according to Gay Hendricks, self-sabotage is the main symptom of the upper limit problem. He states, "We do something to mess it up. We manufacture thoughts and behaviors that bring us back down." This return to the known can manifest in various ways. One of the most common is excessive worry. When everything starts to flow well, your mind begins to invent problems. You find yourself reliving old conversations, imagining catastrophic scenarios, worrying about irrelevant details. Hendricks recounts a revealing personal experience. After a peaceful lunch with a friend and in a moment of complete satisfaction, his mind was invaded by images of his daughter facing difficulties. The feeling of joy was replaced in seconds by anguish. He realized he had exceeded his internal limit of well-being and that his own brain was manufacturing worries to bring him back to his usual state. Another common example of self-sabotage is conflict. After a moment of great harmony in a relationship, an unnecessary argument arises. A cutting comment, a sudden demand, an untimely irritation. You don't know where it came from, but the effect is clear. The mood changes, the connection is broken, and again, you return to the comfort of emotional instability. Hendricks explains, "We enjoy a period of relationship harmony, then stop the flow of connection by criticizing or starting an argument." Self-sabotage also appears as procrastination. You know what you need to do, have the tools, the time, and the ability, but you delay. You make excuses. You become paralyzed. Why? Because completing that task will take you to a new level of success, and your internal thermostat may not be ready for that. You fear the positive consequences as much as you fear the negative ones, and it doesn't stop there. Self-sabotage can infiltrate your health. You neglect yourself just when you start to feel better. In your habits, you break a productive routine after a series of victories. In your dreams, you back away from the opportunity you've always wanted, claiming that it's not the right time yet. The crucial point is that all these actions are not random. They are automatic responses to a single trigger, the approach of something greater, more positive, more fulfilling. What Hendricks calls the upper limit switch is activated when your success threatens to exceed the limits that your mind believes you deserve. Each time you consciously let yourself enjoy the money you have, the love you feel, and the creativity you are expressing, your capacity expands, writes Hendricks. But the reverse is also true. Each time you self-sabotage, you reinforce the limit. You reaffirm to your unconscious that you cannot, that you should not, that you do not deserve. Now that you begin to recognize the various masks of self-sabotage, the next step is even deeper, to discover where and how this limit was created. Because only by understanding the origin of the problem can you deactivate it definitively. In the next part, we will delve into the emotional roots of the upper limit problem, the beliefs learned in childhood, the invisible loyalties, the silent pacts that continue to limit your adult life. The human mind is not born with limits, it learns them. And according to Gay Hendricks, the upper limit problem is, in fact, a direct reflection of the emotional programming you received in your early years of life. Those messages that did not necessarily come through words, but through facial expressions, silences, subtle punishments, or conditional praise. It is in this fertile ground of childhood that your mind learned, silently, to limit itself. If you were a child who felt guilty when receiving praise because you noticed it bothered your siblings, or if you realized that your parents became tense when you stood out too much, then you learned that being too much can be dangerous. You created an internal pact of restraint, an unconscious commitment not to exceed certain limits to avoid hurting anyone, not being rejected, or not being seen as selfish. Self-sabotage, in this context, is an act of invisible loyalty. Gay Hendricks describes this brutally honestly. Our upper limit thermostat setting holds us back from enjoying all the love, financial abundance, and creativity that's rightfully ours. It keeps us in our zone of competence, or at best our zone of excellence. It prevents us from living in the ultimate destination of the journey, our zone of genius. This thermostat is not rational. It was shaped by the need for acceptance. It dictates how far you can grow before you start to disturb others. And the most insidious part, even if intellectually you desire success, love, money, and fulfillment, this childhood code continues to operate behind the scenes, pulling the reins every time you approach something grand. Most people carry this programming throughout their lives without knowing it. They think they are being humble, realistic, sensible. But in reality, they are just obeying old orders. Orders that once made sense to a 5 or 6-year-old child, but that no longer serve today, and only cause stagnation. Over time, this internal structure becomes almost sacred. The idea of allowing yourself more pleasure, more recognition, more freedom provokes guilt. Expansion begins to feel like betrayal, and then the mind does what it has always done. It retreats. But what if you could identify this pattern? What if it were possible to question this old agreement? In the next section, you will discover what it really means to surpass this limit and how to begin the journey to your big leap, the ultimate jump beyond self-sabotage. Breaking through the upper limit problem is not just an exercise in awareness. It is an act of courage. Because to surpass the internal limits that keep you trapped in emotional mediocrity, you will have to let go of the identity you have built up to this point. And this will inevitably bring fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of not being able to sustain the new reality. Fear of leaving behind the version of yourself that learned to survive, but never to thrive. Gay Hendricks is emphatic in stating that this process is not just about removing blocks, but about developing the capacity to sustain a new level of life. He writes, "The only problem you need to solve is your upper limit problem. Solve that one, and everything else falls into place." This statement may seem exaggerated, but it is not. Because when you deactivate the programming that prevents you from receiving and maintaining the best in life, all areas begin to reorganize around a new axis, the axis of abundance. Transcending this limit requires, above all, a willingness to feel good. It seems simple, but most people are not emotionally prepared to sustain long periods of happiness, success, and peace. Hendricks challenges, how long can you really feel happy without finding a worry to occupy yourself? How long can you remain in love, in a stable relationship, before you start to doubt, question, or provoke instability? How long do you allow yourself to prosper financially before creating a crisis, losing focus, or sabotaging yourself? The mind, accustomed to suffering, sees peace as a threat. The body, conditioned to stress, finds relaxation strange. The soul, trained to please, fears disturbing with its fullness. Therefore, the first step to transcend the limit is to make a new pact with yourself. The commitment to allow yourself more love, more money, more health, more success. And not just in isolated moments, but as a new baseline of your existence. Hendricks proposes a simple yet profound exercise. Adopt an expansion mantra. I expand in abundance, success, and love every day as I inspire those around me to do the same. This phrase, repeated with intention, begins to reprogram your mind to accept the extraordinary as part of the routine, not as an exception. It signals to your unconscious that it is safe to grow, it is safe to receive, it is safe to live well, even if no one around you has done so before. But merely repeating words is not enough. You must sustain the emotion behind them. Feel worthy, feel prepared, and most importantly, feel responsible for sustaining this new level without guilt, without fear, without self-sabotage. Of course, there will be resistance. The ego will try to maintain the status quo. Old patterns will emerge forcefully. But now you already know what is at stake. And more than that, you know that this resistance is a sign that you are on the right path. In the next part, we will explore practical tools to help you consolidate this transformation process. Techniques that can be applied in daily life to detect, neutralize, and replace self-sabotaging patterns with habits of expansion and emotional stability. Because recognizing the problem is just the beginning. True change begins in practice. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Knowing that you self-sabotage is a significant breakthrough, but it's not enough. Self-sabotage is cunning, disguised, integrated into daily life. Therefore, to truly break the upper limit problem, more than awareness is needed. Deliberate action and practical tools that enable mental and emotional reprogramming are essential. Gay Hendricks offers a series of strategies that assist in this process, simple yet extremely effective techniques when applied with consistency and honesty. The first is monitoring internal language. Every negative thought, every unnecessary worry, every harsh judgment against oneself is a subtle form of self-sabotage. Hendricks recommends cultivating the ability to notice these thoughts the moment they arise. Then, consciously interrupt them. The goal is not to fight against them, but to replace them with expansive affirmations. He proposes the daily use of a powerful mantra. I expand in abundance, success, and love every day, as I inspire those around me to do the same. Repeating this type of affirmation is not an empty ritual, it is training, a way to program the limbic system to accept and sustain pleasure, success, and emotional stability as normal states of existence. Another essential tool is the use of conscious breathing. Hendricks quotes a phrase from Fritz Perls that perfectly summarizes the relationship between fear and expansion. Fear is excitement without the breath. The paralyzing fear is, in fact, poorly channeled excitement. When you breathe deeply, instead of repressing the feeling, you transform fear into creative energy. This means that the discomfort of growing, of allowing yourself more, can be transmuted, not avoided. Whenever you feel anxiety while moving forward, breathe, expand, embrace the discomfort as a sign of progress. The third practice is mindfulness of micro-sabotages, small behaviors that in isolation seem harmless, like postponing an important commitment, saying yes when you meant to say no, eating without hunger, intentionally losing focus, are expressions of the upper limit problem. They indicate that you are drifting away from your zone of genius, as Hendricks defines it. Your job is to detect these patterns and replace them day by day with decisions aligned with your expansion. But perhaps the most powerful of the tools is the commitment to truth. This means stopping the justification of your limits, stopping the repetition of phrases like, "This is too much for me, I can't handle it, this will never work." Every time you verbalize a limit, you reinforce it. Conversely, when you start declaring that you are capable, that you deserve, that you are ready, you begin to create internal space to sustain new experiences. Breaking the upper limit problem requires more than knowledge. It demands emotional training, daily practices, and a constant decision not to be a prisoner of old internal pacts any longer. But this raises an even deeper question. Why, even with all these tools, do so many people remain trapped in this cycle of self-sabotage? In the next and final part, we will look at the true reason why breaking the limit is so difficult, the fear of one's own greatness. Because in the end, what frightens us the most is not failing. It's having to sustain an extraordinary life. And that is what we will talk about now. In the end, self-sabotage is not just the fear of failure. It is primarily the fear of success, the fear of shining too brightly, of being a nuisance, of being seen, of taking on a new standard of living and, with it, a new level of responsibility for oneself. Because once you accept your greatness, you can no longer hide behind excuses, old traumas, or the false humility you learned to wear as a shield. Gay Hendricks gets straight to the point. Are you willing to take the big leap to your ultimate level of success in love, money, and creative contribution? This is not a rhetorical question. It is an invitation and a challenge. Because accepting that leap is putting an end to cycles of emotional, financial, and relational scarcity. It is committing, radically, to the most powerful and authentic version of yourself. And that requires abandoning, once and for all, the narrative of limitation that you have been telling yourself for years. Embracing your greatness is uncomfortable, because it confronts everything you were taught about modesty, about waiting your turn, about not wanting too much. But the truth is that your expansion does not diminish anyone. On the contrary, when you allow yourself to live in your zone of genius, you inspire others to do the same. You become a catalyst, a mirror of possibility. You literally transform into someone who carries light. And for that reason, you will inevitably disturb those who are still trapped in their own shadow. But that is the mission, and that is the choice. To remain in the comfort zone, controlled by an emotional thermostat programmed by old fears. Or to make the big leap, the ultimate leap, to a new level of love, abundance, creativity, and meaning. And not just visit that place for moments as you have done before, but to stay there. To feel it as your new inner home. To become a person who not only dreams of the extraordinary, but sustains it every day. Now that you understand how the upper limit problem works, the roots that sustain it, and the tools to overcome it, there is just one thing left: to decide. Not just to understand what blocks you, but to choose, firmly, to no longer self-sabotage. Because everything you desire is already possible, if you stop being the obstacle between you and it. If this video has provoked you, made you see patterns you hadn't noticed, comment below, "I am ready for my big leap." Say it out loud, write it down, make it conscious. And remember, the next video is essential. It will deepen your journey even further. Keep watching. You have already taken the first step. Now, go all the way.